Hi, my name is Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this discussion, I'd like to consider the notion that the UK may well agree only a bare bones deal with the EU that would mean that the banking sector, which contributes a lot to the economy and the UK Treasury, could be subject to being shut off without any notice. But first, if you'd like to receive notifications of daily news and political commentary, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I don't know what state Brexit is going to be in on January the 1st, 2021. There are a few possibilities. Some seem more likely than others, but I'm going to consider for the purposes of this topic that the outcome of the negotiations in 2020 is going to be a bare bones EU agreement that keeps the essential areas of cooperation with the EU going in a way that avoids the worst damage. Under such an agreement, there is bound to be an understanding regarding financial services. The UK depends heavily on our banking sector. From the point of view of most of us, what really matters is the taxes that are raised from it. And it raises about 11% of tax revenues that go to the Treasury. Imagine what a major hit to that sector would do for a government that already has plans to reduce taxes and public spending. And this hit to the banking sector was not really considered in Boris Johnson's spending plans. So there will definitely be a move for the UK to get agreement for the City of London Financial Centre to be able to do business in Europe. In return, of course, we are going to have to agree to some rules to provide a level playing field. But Boris Johnson says that he wants to further deregulate the banking sector. And remember, this is a guy who recently boasted about the only one to stick up for the bankers, the same bankers that crashed the global economy just over a decade ago. The aim would be to attract more business, of course, undercutting European competitors. And there are those that fear that the EU may be forced into a race to the bottom if the low tax, low regulation financial hub on the outskirts of Europe starts sucking up all the business in financial services. But it seems this isn't how the EU intend things to go. The plan, under those circumstances, would appear to be to shut off access to the European markets of UK-based banks. Croatia's Prime Minister, who will be taking over the EU presidency, was asked a question about this, and he said that all arguments and considerations would be treated as political. And the meaning is clear, therefore. The EU are not going to allow an outsider to have a competitive edge inside their own markets. And I've said it a while ago, there are some genuine philosophical arguments about the way the EU does things. You know, there are some people that, when they were talking about why they voted leave, said, well, I voted for this reason. You go, well, that's fair enough. That is a philosophical objection you have to the way the EU does things. Of course, it's not any different outside of the EU, but okay, you've got your argument there. None of these valid arguments are the Brexiteer arguments, but they exist. And one of them is that although the EU is creating the largest free trade area in the world, when it comes to those who are not part of their system, they are aggressively protectionist. And, but that is an argument of economic philosophy. And it's not like the rest of the world is trying to trade freely anyway. I know economists have worked out that if we just had free trade in the world, if we didn't have all of these silly, tariffs and quotas and all the rest of it, the world would be twice as productive as it is now. But, as I say, it's not like the EU is protectionist and those outside are not. But, as I say, those philosophies are just that. They're not important to most people. They're not important to most citizens. What is important is that the EU backs its own. That used to include us. Not anymore. They will not stand for a British bank taking business off a Dutch bank due to constraining rules that the EU has imposed on that Dutch bank. But rather than remove those constraints, which would just lead to corruption and harm the EU ideals, remember those rules exist for a reason, and it's to the benefit of ordinary people. What they'll do instead is they'll just simply shut down those British banks or shut down their access to EU markets. And this could be done at any time. We could sign an agreement, this December, next January, to allow British banks to have their passport to provide services in the EU, and then have it revoked a few weeks later if Boris Johnson then enacts any legislation which means that British banks are not following the same rules as EU ones. there will be no long-term certainty about those British banks' ability to trade in EU markets, which is the problem of a loose, bare bones agreement with the EU. It allows no certainty in the medium to long term. And in such an environment, you can imagine customers, who are currently using these British banks, but that they need financial services. They may be based in the EU, or they may just, need to buy financial products from the EU. And if they need a bank that is going to definitely have access to those products, they're much more likely to think, well, if I transfer my business to a Dutch bank or a French bank or a German bank or an Irish bank, they're definitely going to have access to those products, come what may. Doesn't matter what Boris Johnson does. So the only customers that will retain any confidence in the British banks are those who don't need access to EU markets, or indeed any markets that are linked with the EU with comprehensive deals. And that'll definitely lead to a sharp decline in the City of London's power. It has already taken a bit of a hit with the loss of offices moving to other European centres over the last couple of years. There have been a number of banks set up on the continent, in particular, English-speaking banks, to be able to take over that business, and they've already been starting to do so. And of course, what that means for the rest of us is that tax revenue, which is the important thing for me personally, because I don't work in the banking sector, it doesn't provide jobs for me, and the fact that a lot of people get very wealthy out of it doesn't really help me either. What does help me is the taxes raised from that industry, and without any other sector being able to compensate for the loss in that tax revenue, Boris Johnson, despite his spending plan boasts before the election, he's already been instructing his ministers to slash projects where they can to save money. He's been saying things like, oh, we understand you might have your pet projects. Be brutal, be harsh, be severe, slash and burn projects in your departments. Perhaps he knows what's coming. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.